From the Song of Moses to the songs in Revelation, what do the songs in the Bible tell us about God to help us with our lives every day? That's what this series is all about. Stand by for brilliant insights from Bible expert Mike Beaumont. I'm David Taverner, and this is Bible Songs in 30 Minutes. The God who gives understanding. We're going to look at Psalm 73, but I did just notice at the very end of 72, the Bible says, this concludes the prayers of David, son of Jesse. Is this a sort of point in the Psalms worth noting?
Yeah, absolutely. We're about to move into book 3 of the Psalms. We said in one of our earlier episodes that there are 5 books of Psalms, 5 collections of Psalms. They all hang around certain themes or authors. So yeah, we've got to the end now of David's Psalms. And we're about to come into another block of Psalms. Psalm 73, its superscription is a psalm of Asaph. Now, Asaph was one of the leaders of one of the choirs, the Levitical choirs that David established. And Psalm 73 is the first of 11 psalms that are written by him and that open book 3 of the Psalms.
What distinguishes the Psalms of Asaph?
Well, this might give you a clue because some scholars have called this section the Book of Crisis. So there you are. That probably gives you a clue, doesn't it? Because many of the Psalms in this section deal with some sort of crisis that had happened, personal or national, past or present. And some of them deal with later events after Asaph. So they're probably written, although it says of Asaph, by his descendants. So there's the clue. We're going to see some struggles in this section.
But again, that's life.
Absolutely. You know, unless we are very, very fortunate indeed, few of us sail through life with no worries or pressures or problems, do we?
So should we sort of look at the first part of this Psalm 73 then?
Yeah, we'll split it into 2 because it is quite long and it falls quite nicely into 2 parts. The first 14 verses are really all about a test of faith. And then the second part of the psalm from verse 15 is all about the triumph of faith. So there's the struggle and then the getting through it. So let's look at the first part. Psalm 73, verses 1 to 14. Surely God is good to Israel, to those who are pure in heart. But as for me, my feet had almost slipped. I had nearly lost my foothold. For I envied the arrogant when I saw the prosperity of the wicked. They have no struggles. Their bodies are healthy and strong. They're free from the burdens common to man. They're not plagued by human ills. Therefore, pride is their necklace. They clothe themselves with violence. From their callous hearts comes iniquity. The evil conceits of their minds know no limits. They scoff and speak with malice. In their arrogance, they threaten oppression. Their mouths lay claim to heaven, and their tongues take possession of the earth. Therefore their people turn to them and drink up waters in abundance. They say, how can God know? Does the Most High have knowledge? This is what the wicked are like. Always carefree, they increase in wealth. Surely in vain have I kept my heart pure. In vain have I washed my hands in innocence. All day long I have been plagued. I have been punished every morning.
Well, he's certainly got his issues, and I see why this is now part of a collection called the Book of Crisis. And at the beginning there, my feet had almost slipped. I mean, what might he be referring to?
He'd felt like he'd been standing on firm ground in life. After all, he'd set his heart to be pure. He'd sought to honestly be obedient to God and his laws as best as he was able to. He'd kept himself ritually clean. He'd done all the sacrifices and the festivals and so on. So here's a guy who has honestly done his best at lining up his life with God. And then he'd looked out and seen, yeah, but who is it who does well in life? It's all those rotten folk out there who are stealing, cheating, twisting, don't care, don't bother about God. Look, they're prospering. And that thought caused his feet to almost slip, as he put it. He had been on a firm rock, and yet looking at something other than God, looking at how these people had prospered, had caused him to stumble in life. Perhaps as still we do today when we look at people and think, well, look at that. Look at what they get away with. What's the point very often? What's the point of living decent lives? What's the point of being godly when you look out there at the godly and frankly, they seem to be doing better? So I suppose this psalm is one of those that asks that eternal question, why? It's a particular why here, but why? And the why had caused his foot almost to slip. And David, even as I was reading that psalm to us just a few moments ago, I felt like there would be some listeners who really echoed that thought in their heart, that they were in a situation at the moment where it just feels like their foot is slipping because of what's going on round about. Well, just keep listening, because Asaph found the key to the door to get him out of that.
I mean, that sense of us comparing ourselves to others, it's natural. We do it all the time. There's no problem with it, is there?
Well, it depends what the comparing is, doesn't it? You're right. It is natural. We all do it. The trouble is, underneath it is a really unhealthy attitude. And it comes out in those first few verses. Asaph says, as for me, my feet had almost slipped. I had nearly lost my foothold. Now, here's the word, for I envied the arrogant. And actually, when we compare ourselves with others, what we are really doing is envying what they've got. Why have we only been able to go on holiday to Cornwall when they get to Corfu? Why am I only on this salary and I work much harder than them and they're on a bigger salary? So comparison very, very easily slips into far more than comparison. It inevitably slips into envy. And I think the trouble is with envy very often becomes not only I want what you've got, but also I don't want you to have it and I would like it instead. And it is an incredibly destructive emotion.
How much damage can it cause?
Oh, well, huge. Envy can consume us. So we need to be really, really careful with envy. There's a little proverb in Proverbs 14, verse 30, that says, a heart at peace gives life to the body. It's good psychology there, isn't there? A heart at peace gives life to the body, but envy rots the bones.
Wow.
What a powerful picture that is. Envy rots the bones. And Jesus actually said that envy is one of the things that can eat away at us, that can defile us. He was talking on one occasion with some of the religious leaders who were very fussy about what people ate and how they washed their hands and external things like this. And in Mark 7, he said from verse 18, are you so dull? Don't you see that nothing that enters a man from outside can make him unclean? For it doesn't go into his heart, but into his stomach, and then out of his body. And in saying this, he declared all foods clean. But Jesus went on, what comes out of a man is what makes him unclean. For from within, out of men's hearts come evil thoughts, sexual immorality, theft, murder, adultery, greed, malice, deceit, lewdness, envy, slander, arrogance, folly, all these things from inside and make a man unclean. It's this sort of stuff that messes you up, we might say in modern language. So Jesus was very clear. The envy, the sort of envy that Asaph was honestly experiencing. I mean, isn't it great? Put it down on paper and we're still reading about it so we can learn. But that kind of envy, Jesus said, can defile you, mess you up, or as the writer of Proverbs put it, rot your very bones, destroy who you are within.
We have this phrase, keeping up with the Joneses. But I've always wondered, who do the Joneses keep up with?
Yeah, they probably keep up with the Smiths, don't they? There's always someone else, isn't there? And it's almost like no matter how much you have, there'll be someone else who has more. So how much is enough for us? We often think, if only I had a little bit more. And I understand, particularly when people are on almost the breadline with their income, to think, if only we had a bit more. And for them, very often it is a case of we'd be able to eat that little bit better, or if we could have one holiday in 5 years, it would be wonderful. So I'm not meaning to be demeaning in saying that. But the trouble is, how much more is enough? If only I had a bit more. But then you get to that level and you up your way of living, and then you want a little bit more again and a little bit more again. So envy, looking at what others have and what you don't have. And it's not just about money. I find it fascinating that here, as Asaph goes through some of the things that he's envying, it's not just like money and material possessions. If you look back at the psalm, he says they seem to prosper in verse 3. He says they have no struggles or ill health in verse 4. He says they're free of life's troubles in verse 5. They get away with pride, violence, callousness, evil imaginings in verses 6 to 7. He said their words, they can be mocking and harsh and arrogant and oppressive in verse 8, and they get away with that. They're proud and self-assertive in verse 9. They've built up a flattering followers. I suppose we would say today, they've got thousands of followers on social media. So he's looking at all these things. It's not just money, right across life. These people seem to have things and yet don't live godly lives and seem to get away with it. And he's saying to God, why? Please, why?
An age-old question for sure, but as relevant now as it ever was then.
Yeah, absolutely. It is age-old, isn't it? Job, of course, is the book in the Bible that tackles that question at length, where Job had everything, lost everything. And while he never loses his faith in God, there's chapter after chapter of, but God, why has this happened? I don't understand. He wants understanding, and we've called this episode The God Who Gives Understanding, and that was Job's struggle. He wasn't even, in a sense, angry or blaming God for what had happened. He just wanted understanding of what was going on and why. And all these friends who came with all their wonderful theologically sound answers, it just didn't click for him, and he still couldn't get it. And that's the place that Asaph is in this first half of the psalm.
So does he get an answer to his question, why?
Well, he does, but there's a real turning point of the when that leads to answering the why. So shall we read the second half of the psalm?
Please do.
Now. So let's read on. He's outlined the testing of his faith. Now let's look at the triumph of faith from verse 15. If I had said, I will speak thus, all this stuff that he's just been talking about, I would have betrayed your children. When I tried to understand all this, it was oppressive to me, until I entered the sanctuary of God. Then I understood their final destiny. Surely you place them on slippery ground. You cast them down to ruin. How suddenly are they destroyed, completely swept away by terrors. As a dream when one awakes, so when you arise, O Lord, you will despise them as fantasies. When my heart was grieved and my spirit embittered, I was senseless and ignorant. I was a brute beast before you, yet I am always with you. You hold me by my right hand. You guide me with your counsel, and afterwards you will take me into glory. Whom have I in heaven but you? And earth has nothing I desire besides you. My flesh and my heart may fail, but God is the strength of my heart and my portion forever. Those who are far from you will perish. You destroy all who are unfaithful to you. But as for me, it is good to be near God. I have made the sovereign Lord my refuge. I will tell of all your deeds.
So something has certainly dawned on him, not least because he described himself as a brute beast before you in his old ways.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Very ruthless analysis there of where he had allowed himself to get to. And that's the trouble with walking down this path of envy. It takes you down a path, and before you know it, like any sin, it takes you deeper and deeper and deeper until you get to the think, my goodness, how did I end up here? Yeah, I was just like a brute beast, a wild animal before you, behaving like that. He now sees.
But it sounded like, when he went into the sanctuary, the penny dropped.
It did. There are like two key turning points in that second half of the psalm. The first is in verse 17 when he says until, and the second is in verse 23 when he says yet. So these are the two turning points. This is how I was. It was sheer animal behavior until I entered the sanctuary of God. Now, for him, that was literally going into the sanctuary, into the temple there at Jerusalem. Because we don't have a temple to go into, and we don't need to go into a church to do this or into any sacred place, because this is all about the presence of God rather than a place of God. What he's saying here is, this is how I was, and it was all getting built up inside me, and I was getting het up about it and more angry and more bitter until I came into your presence, brought it all into your presence, God, and laid it down at your feet. And here's the turning point. As he comes into the presence of God, it's almost like he's got through all of this and he stood there and asked, well, why God? But it wasn't really a question. He's not really asking. His why God is really, what? God? But he's taken time there to stop and to genuinely come into God's presence, to let go of it all and say, okay, God, okay, I'm just exhausted here with trying to work this out. Here I am in your presence. Remember, we can do that anywhere. We can do it in our room at home. We can do it out on a walk. We do not have to go to a church or a holy place, because through Jesus, God can be there just like that for us. We simply have to turn and say, Lord. So he comes into God's presence and lets it go. And it's interesting that it's as he comes into God's presence, he doesn't really get an answer to all his questions. And of course, Job doesn't get an answer to his questions. All he does is he has this encounter with God that is so big, he says, okay, God, I don't need answers anymore. Yeah, I just know you are God, and I trust you. But what he does get, although he doesn't get answers, he does get understanding. And the two are slightly different. He does get understanding from God of what's going on here. And as he comes into God's presence, he gets an understanding of three things in that final section. The first is how judgment surely comes. He sees when he comes into God's presence that, okay, the wicked may seem to be getting away with things at the moment, but the wicked surely get their just deserts at the end. Now, we don't think of judgment a lot these days, but it's a very clear and very repeated strand of scriptures teaching in both Old and New Testaments, and even from the lips of Jesus himself. So judgment does come. There will be a judgment day one day when everyone who has ever lived will have to give an account of everything they have ever said, thought, and done, and God will call them to account. And he gets an understanding. The penny drops. Okay, they may be getting away with it now, but I've seen, God, how judgment will surely come, and I need to leave that in your hands. Second, he sees how wrong attitudes harm us more than they harm others. When my heart was grieved and my spirit embittered, I was senseless and ignorant. I was a brute beast before you. Now, I tell you what, he wasn't describing himself like that before. He wasn't thinking, look at that David Taverner, he's got this, that, and the other, and I don't have that, and what a brute beast I am for thinking that. No, he was thinking, how right I am for thinking that. But suddenly coming into God's presence has changed his perspective. Why? Because I think when we come into God's presence, the first thing that happens is it softens our heart. It softens our heart, and we have to start letting things go, and he suddenly sees what he was really like while he was walking this path of envy, that it wasn't doing a thing to them. His neighbor who got a horse and he hadn't got one, or whatever it might be, had got gold reserves and he didn't. All he was thinking is, look at them, they've got this, and look how they treat people. But his attitude wasn't affecting them one iota. All it was doing was locking him up. Do you know, the same thing still happens today when we not just get envious with people, but get angry with people, don't forgive people. The only thing it does, Jesus said in one of his parables, is lock us up, not them.
So we suffer and they don't.
Absolutely. So he gets understanding first of how judgment will come one day. And I just have to wait and trust God for that. Second, he gets an understanding that wrong attitudes always harm us more than them. And then third, and I love this, he gets an understanding towards the end of the psalm there that God is always with us, no matter what happens, and that he is always with God. I'm always with you. You hold me by your right hand. You guide me with your counsel. Whom have I in heaven but you, etc. So he understands that God is there, that he holds us, guides us, has a destiny for us, is the treasure of our life. My heart and flesh may fail, but God is the strength of my life and my portion forever. He suddenly realized, God, I may not have all this stuff, but I've got you. And you know what? They haven't got you. And so he's come into the presence of God and got an insight, got a glimpse into things. And this is why we call this episode The God Who Gives Understanding, because still today, if we will stop our fretting and fussing and anger and questioning and just say, stop, 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 put it down and come into the presence of God like Asaph did and say, God, I'm getting screwed up here through all of this. I need to meet with you. I need to hear from you. then God will always be there for us, always speak to us, always have something to say to us. But you know what I've discovered through the Bible and in life? It's rarely the answer that we were looking for. But once we've encountered God like Asaph did here by coming into his presence, suddenly we see, do you know what? I don't need an answer. After all, I've met with God now, and that's okay, and I can leave it with him. And I would say to listeners today, if you've got things that have been going on where you've been envious of people or angry with people, resentful of them, you've not forgiven them, come on, leave it with God. Is your God big enough to deal with this or not? Because if you are holding on to it, what you are saying is, only I can deal with this, God. Well, you've got a very small God then, haven't you? Is your God big enough for you today to bring all of that stuff to him and lay it at his feet and say, I can't carry this anymore, God. I don't know what to do with it. I know it's eating me up. It's getting me nowhere. And what I need is to experience again what Asaph did. Your presence, your reassurance, and just knowing that in whatever situation I am in or will be, you are there with me and you always will be there with me.
It's why that verse from the Proverbs you mentioned is so true. A heart at peace gives life to the body, but envy rots the bones. And I was just thinking, when you were talking about judgment and perhaps a new understanding of judgment of others, that I suppose Asaph, when he was looking at the life of others, was judging them, as perhaps we do ourselves, but judging them on his terms.
Yes, and that's the trouble, isn't it? And our terms are so far away from God's terms. God says through Isaiah, your ways are not my ways, your thoughts are not my thoughts. As far as the heavens are above the earth, so far are my thoughts above your thoughts and my ways above your ways. And so you're right, when we judge, we're judging by our standards. So what are we doing when we do that? We are making ourselves God. And if we're doing that, frankly, we need to repent. Because God says you'll have no other gods before me. And if we are judging like that, we're putting our standards as the ultimate, not God's. And sometimes they may align with God's, but if they do, we can leave it to God to deal with. So often they're not his standards and his ways, they're ours. And they're ours because we don't like where we're at and the situation we're in, and we would like it to change, and it hasn't, please.
It also sounds as if his understanding, the psalmist's understanding, has switched his focus from him to God.
Yes, absolutely. And not only from him to God, but from the stuff to God, from the things that were frustrating him so much. So this is the whole point of coming into the presence of God. The whole point of doing things like having a time each day when you can be quiet and pray, when you can read the Bible, God's word, is to let you have a space and to give God space to come in and for you to experience his presence and put things in a different perspective again. And the trouble is here, Asaph had lost perspective. But isn't that what all of us do when we get uptight about something? And it's normally about one thing in particular, or maybe one thing that was the straw that broke the camel's back, and we get uptight about it. But having a time each day where we can come into God's presence and pray and read his word, and especially say, God, I've got to give this to you, because this is going to cripple me. A heart at peace gives life to the body, but envy, or whatever the issue is rotting my bones. And life is too short, Lord, to let my bones rot. So I have to deal with this. I have to bring this into your presence. Give me your understanding, please. And the lovely thing is, whenever we will come to God, whenever we will stop and choose like Asaph did, he chose. I was going through all of this until I said, I will enter the sanctuary of God. It's almost as if he's saying, oh, enough of this. I need to go and meet with God. And when we will do that today, when we will stop and say, I can't carry this stuff, these feelings any longer. I have to get into the presence of God. It's when we do that that still today, we, like Asaph, can encounter the God who gives understanding. We may not get all our answers, but we will have had an encounter with him, and that will always be enough.
This is Bible Songs in 30 Minutes with Mike Beaumont and me, David Taverner. Don't miss our other 30-minute conversations about the Big Book, Bible biogs, Bible surprises, and the ever-popular Bible books. And how about following our Bible journeys on location in the Holy Land and beyond as we track the New Testament in Jesus Then and Now, followed by Unstoppable Church Then and Now. You can listen to all these wherever you get your UCB podcasts.